Hello, everybody. Welcome to the latest edition of the Coaching Conversation. In this series, we're aiming to help business owners, business leaders, and fellow coaches by sharing our experience and the experience of our guests who've coached people all around the world in all of different sectors and industries that you can imagine. So, very little more to say other than please now sit back, relax, and enjoy this edition, and look out for a special offer for our loyal audience at the end of the programme. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Coaching Conversation. And today we're going to talk about helping people in the workplace with marital stress. And to help us with that, I'm joined by Lee Baucom, all the way from Raleigh, North Carolina. Lee,
thank you.
Welcome to the
for having me.
Conversation.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. Let's have a conversation.
Can we start by, it's a very strange subject for someone to be specialising in. I know it's a really important subject, but how did you find yourself doing exactly that now?
Yeah. So I was trained as a therapist and then switched over to coaching right after I finished my training as a therapist, because that was kind of how I did things. I was kind of a coach at my core. And so why marriages and why troubled marriages? Well, because I watched some family members, extended family. My parents are happily married still, and my grandparents were happily married. But I had an uncle who took a different path, and I had a couple of aunts who took different paths, and I watched the impact. So that made me, even as a child, I was probably 8, 9, 10, 11 when some of that was happening. It really made me think, what's up with relationships that are supposed to be stable relationships, and how can they get so explosive? So sometime later, as I was working with marriages, I kind of looked back on that and went, oh, that was what started it, because I have cousins that I still have no contact with. They had to split away from the family. And I think there has to be better ways. It turned out marital therapy, not particularly effective. And so I decided to go out on my own and figure out what does help couples.
And so, looking at in terms of the workplace specifically,
Yeah,
where obviously these stresses and pressures manifest in a different way than they might do socially, what would a typical client look like? Would it be the organisation? Would it be the individual? What would it be?
Yeah, so I have worked with a number of organizations to talk about relationships within the workplace for a very simple reason, that whatever stress is going on with someone who's an employee doesn't stay at home. And this is particularly true with marital issues, because it's so encompassing for people. And so while my primary work has been with individuals, even sent by some organizations and companies, I've also gone into companies to help talk about relationships, period, and specifically marital relationships. One of my observations is that the same underlying issues a lot of times that are floating around in a marriage just get replicated in the workforce.
And what guidance would you give an employer or a leader in that situation, apart from cutting someone some slack? I mean, what would be the specific things they could actually constructively do?
Yeah, and so there are lots of different stages to what a marriage crisis looks like and how it bleeds over into the workforce. Sometimes you realize that there are some conflicts or mismatches in workplaces that are actually because they're coming in stressed out and their bristles are already up. So a lot of times what I see is a kind of the first front end for organizations is to say, you've got to go do therapy. My observation is sometimes that isn't what's decreasing it. Instead of saying, hey, let's get you some help with the relationship that in a way that is helpful, maybe some coaching or other resources, then you find that sometimes they're chasing after the wrong issue. So let me just say that what I think is the central issue in marriages is disconnection. And there's a specific reason that happens. But what I've noticed is sometimes that disconnection leads people to interact at work in ways that are counterproductive. Like they overly connect with people trying to fill in that blank, or they replicate the disconnection. in either place, you're left with this, missing that point of appropriate connection. And that is something that an organization can point out. It feels like you're on the wrong side of these relationships one way or the other. Let's get you help in understanding that primary connection point. That is how I ended up with a lot of people coming to me for coaching, either in the office or now virtually.
And so if we then spin it to the individual, and the work will involve their position in the workplace as well, what are the challenges that typically you see someone with marital stress is exhibiting?
Yeah, if it were like a lot of other kind of places for stress in our life, it wouldn't be as encompassing. And so where I see a lot of people, sometimes maybe they're stressed about a particular thing that they can kind of sidestep at work. If what's going on is your major relationship, your marital relationship is stressed out, that is a higher level of stress that comes into the workforce than lots of other situations. I've known lots of people who have had health crises that continue to work and it didn't affect their work. They've had financial crises that didn't affect their work, though that one leaks in a lot of places too, because it has some underlying painful psychology points. But then I watch where it happens when it's the marital relationship. So they're going home feeling unsure of what's going to happen. They're in an unsure situation at home and coming back in, and their mindset is about that. Many people in a marriage crisis become what I call monofocused. Their only thing is, what do I do about this? And so every moment, I have people who will say, I'm listening to your podcast nonstop. And I'm like, don't do that. I mean, it's okay to take in some information, but you need to be still doing the rest of your life. And a lot of times they don't feel like they can. So they're carrying that load into the workforce. So they're exhausted from lack of sleep. They are processing painful situations, which leaks out into the workforce. So they're shorter tempered than they might normally be, less energy than they might normally be, less attentive than they might normally be. And a lot of those high attentive positions, for instance, I've worked with doctors and I've worked with pilots and other people who were very concerned that stress at home was beginning to affect their performance at work, and they didn't have room for that.
That's a really interesting point when you pick up such crucial roles like a pilot. I mean, yeah. Does the type of organization or the size of organization or the culture of an organization that someone works in impact the stresses that they're experiencing?
So it's not that the environment creates the stress that's going back, but it amplifies in one way or the other. So culture does matter. If there are some cultures, some corporate cultures or organizational cultures that have a lot of emotional awareness and actually work to create kind of a psychological safety place for their employees. They provide a lot of support. That's different than, say, a high pressure environment where that actually amplifies the marital stress. And then you have this back and forth. So you're stressed at work because it's high pressure. And then you're stressed at home because the crisis is going on, and they begin to amplify each other. So healthier environments, healthier cultures allow for the recovery and allow for a better kind of decision making, whether it's at home or at work. So it's not that the environment is creating the stress, but it sure is an amplifier.
And is there an intervention or some advice you can give to individuals who are in a very difficult environment at work? Is there something extra you can do for them?
Yeah, and so part of that is differentiating what is what, and I think this is true both for an individual and the organization. If you're in a high pressure environment, you want to make sure that you're minimizing what are those outside stressors. You can't get rid of them because that's the nature of life, right? And so there's minimizing by helping people to have better coping skills, or encouraging them to find some resolution to those stressful issues. And both of those are valid. There are times when we need to up our coping game, and there are times when we need to solve the crisis and solve the stress points. Corporations and organizations that do that work by providing resources or training or coaching can create a better outcome on both sides. They have happier, healthier workers, and they have a more resilient workspace.
So, looking at that in the round, do you have a tool bag or a kit bag of tools and models that you can roll out to help individuals navigate what is a very, very difficult time?
Yeah, I actually use one of the things that I guess kind of my little skill level is creating the frameworks to help people walk through. So I have, it's called Pivot, and it's about how do you move from reaction to value-based decisions. And that is true in relationships because we often are reactive with our spouse, but it's also true in life of how do we decide to not react, but respond. So that whole pause stimulus piece, I talk about that pause as the beginning point. That's actually the P in Pivot is pause. And what we're working towards is the value-based ways we're going to react. So that is one of the tools that I often use. But one of the cores for me is helping people identify what is within their control. Call it the 3 A's. I can control only 3 things in my life: my aspirations, my attitude, and my actions. That's it. And when people start understanding that, they start regulating better on those pieces. So aspirations are, where do I want to go? If you have an employee, what is their track in the organization? Where do they want to go within the organization? But that person also is thinking about that in life. What kind of marriage do I want to have? How do I want my life to unfold? That's aspirations. Your attitude, am I going to figure this out or am I going to give up? Those are basically the two. I'm not talking about having a happy attitude, but can I figure this out or give up? And both are valid at points. There are times in life when you go, you know what, this isn't working. I need to walk away from this situation. But there are a lot of times when people are tempted to do that, and their choice is actually to figure this out, to use the growth mindset. Given what's here now, what is now possible? So we have a choice about that. And the last thing we have, that 3rd A, is our actions, what we do, what we don't do, what we say, what we don't say. So many times in an organization or with an individual, I'm helping them understand that along with the fact that underneath it all is what I consider the way of making values-driven action. And for organizations that almost always have like their values culture of where they want to go, that shift can be powerful, whether it's in a marriage crisis or in the workplace. So here's the thing. These tools that we're talking about, while I often teach them about relationships and marital relationships specifically, they fit everywhere. And one of the things I often notice is that when we work to deal with one area, it begins to stabilize the person. So if they're stabilizing their marriage crisis, that person often is more stable and stabilized to go into the workspace. And when we're using these skills, a workspace becomes more stable for the people who are in it.
And you talked about growth mindset. You talked about trying to make the best of a bad job with, I'm in this situation, how do I find a way out of it? Do you find that that's something that you can help people adopt quickly, or is it a sort of thing that takes quite a time, quite a few of interventions from you?
Yeah, so the awareness can be pretty quick. You can see the lights go on when you're explaining something to somebody that maybe they haven't thought about, especially with a growth mindset. I mean, there's some times that's an easy on-off switch for people. Activating it in their life can take longer because we have habits. And so part of what we're having to do is to reset the systems of our life. I'm big on systems because systems create our habits and habits lead our actions. So many times people find themselves, so let's go with the marriage thing. They have systems in place that keep them disconnected. how they deal with things in the household, how they deal with each other, the topics they avoid. They have systems in place. They can replace those, but they have to be choosing to do that, having an understanding. So let me just an example. When I talk about the fact that the roots of problems are disconnection, and I even can point to people at how they became disconnected. They stop looking at the symptoms that they're often naming, which is what brings people into coaching or counseling or wherever they're trying to get help. It's the symptoms. And I'm going, that's not that. That's a symptom. Let's go back to the disconnection. Why are we disconnected? You've now got habits of disconnection. So let's create habits of connection. That crosses over to work too. What habits do I have in place on how I'm interacting at the workplace? And so what we find is that people are more global than sometimes we give them credit. And we want to put them in the, oh, they're having this, but actually that's impacting everything. And by the way, if we change that, it impacts everything too. So that flow goes both ways for an organization.
And so as you start to show them this is a way forward, how long typically, or how many interventions typically do you find yourself working with some before they can master it for themselves?
That's the variance on, and we have to wait and see what somebody is ready to change. There's some changes that are harder than others. Generally, I work with people for a few weeks, but sometimes 3 to 6 months is what they need in order to really get it in, because those patterns have become deeply ingrained. For some people, those patterns go all the way back to the family they grew up in. Some people, it's more recent, and so they have more flexibility. But honestly, change happens quickly when people stop doing what is making things worse. But lasting change often takes some consistency that you can't predict until you're working on it.
Yeah, and I get the awareness is easy, the practice is difficult piece. I think we can all, we're hardwired to react to certain things, aren't we?
And it takes a while to rewire. Yeah.
Yeah. Is it the kind of change that lasts beyond just this period of stress, do you find?
Yeah. So when people really take it in, the changes they make. So therapy talks about first order change versus second order change. So let's say that somebody says, you know what, you're too angry at work. You can't keep yelling at people. Okay. So they stop yelling, but the anger doesn't change. They're still angry. They just decided to, suck it down. That's a first order change. Recognizing what's underneath that anger, for instance, going, oh, wait, people are angry when they're hurt or fearful or threatened. Those are the reasons that we come out with anger. So when I understand that, that can begin to route to what's the hurt, what's the fear, what's the threat, right? So let's talk about what I think make some lasting change, because then we'll see how it goes into the workforce. So emotional regulation. That's a skill, but it also starts in an awareness. So I can have the awareness that I'm not emotionally regulated. And sometimes, I've sat with people in my office and had to let them know that their bodily sensation that they're feeling right now actually is anger. They weren't able to even specify that because they've gotten a message about that. So now they have an awareness that they're not emotionally regulated. That awareness lets them know when they need to emotionally regulate. Emotional regulation is a skill set. Yeah. So if we can talk about that regulation, then they can lead with that at home or work. Clarity of action is another one. Sometimes people aren't aware of how their actions might be creating harm. So when they're clear about their actions, then they can begin to shift to have maybe more empathy, more understanding of how they're impacting things. That works both at home and a carryover to the office. Consistency of action. I mean, I think this is at the heart of both sides, right? If consistency of being connected with my spouse allows us to have a strong relationship, but that's also what organizations are looking for, that consistency of action, so they can count on their staff. And that piece goes both ways. Letting go of control, or more specifically, what you can't control, is a big piece. So when people say, oh, this is what I can control, the backside of that is, these are all the other things I can't control. And letting that go is helpful both at home and the workplace. I'm often, when I was consulting with family businesses, I was often pointing out where somebody was working to control things that were not within their control. And we needed to back away from that and begin to address it in a different way. That is true in life. It's true in marriage. It's true in the workforce. And I think the big thing is an identity shift that happens for people who are working on these things. They go from being a reactive partner to what I call a steady leader. And that is true in life. You know, if they're reactive at work, we know what we get. If they're reactive at home, we know what we get. Steady leader trumps it both places. You can be a steady leader at home and at work, and that counteracts that reactive partner.
So not only does it reduce stress, it looks like it also helps them resolve whatever the issues are in the first place by being the leader in positive outcomes as opposed to just reacting to the latest stimuli.
Yeah, and part of it is they're deciding to lead themselves differently. And so one of the things that is definitely true is that lasting change isn't really about some intensity, right? It's really about consistency under pressure, and consistency under pressure is a hallmark of a strong organizational player. You know, we talk about that high stress situation if it's at work. Consistency under pressure is what they're trying to create. But that is true in an everyday organization. We've all got stuff coming at us and reports and whatever else that needs to be addressed. And so learning those skills of consistency matter across the board for people.
And do you find at any time that you are coaching, working with both partners in a marriage stress situation? Does that happen?
It does happen. I have a kind of a rule that for me to coach with both people, they both have to commit to moving forward, not with necessarily saving their marriage. That's not what I'm asking, but to commit to moving forward. What's problematic is if a spouse is resistant to anything, they will sabotage the process and become more resistant to the process. In that case, I work with one person on that self-regulation, on becoming more of a team player, becoming a better piece of that. Often that does enough. So we'll just do a comparison both in the workforce and at home. If one person makes a shift in how they're interacting with somebody else, it changes the interaction and changes the relationship. And so by working with one person, they can make shifts that are magnified in the relationships and change the underlying relationships.
Yeah, positivity spreads, doesn't it? It's contagious. And saying whatever it is.
Yeah. In fact, there's some research years ago that was talking about the how contagious emotions were. Turns out negative emotions are much more contagious than positive emotions.
Yeah, so I've be aware stats. Yes, between 3 and 5 times. Yeah,
yeah.
Lee, it's been fascinating listening to you, and I'm sure the audience will be taken with this. It's amazing what the impact, the culture, or the attitude of the organization will be towards someone experiencing this kind of stress, and how they can either magnify it or help minimize it, support it. It's also fascinating to see how you go about tackling what is a real problem for people in a constructive way. So thank you for sharing that with us. Yeah, if there's anybody in the audience wants to find out more, where can they find you?
So if it's a marriage crisis, I have the Save the Marriage program. SaveTheMarriage.com is the easy place to find me, and Lee at SaveTheMarriage.com, particularly if somebody goes, you know what, we want to bring some skills to our organization, to our workforce, we can do that. So SaveTheMarriage.com, a great place to start. If somebody's just going, you know what, I don't want to be stuck at that point, I have an app that helps people to unpause their marriage, and that is at unpauseyourmarriage.com. Easiest place to find me, though, SaveTheMarriage.com.
Been great talking to you. Thanks.
Oh, thank you.
And that's it for this edition of the Coaching Conversation. See you again next time. So there you have it, the latest edition of the Coaching Conversation. Hope you enjoyed it, hope you found it useful, and I hope it did what it set out to do. As promised at the beginning of the programme, Here is a special offer for you, our loyal audience. If you reach out to me at gwiley@sagereen.com and mention this podcast, we'll make available to you a coaching program for you and or your team at a 50% discount. So where can you reach us? So it's definitely gwiley@sagereen.com. You can also reach us at the executive mindset at sagereen.com, and our website is clearly theexecutivemindset.co.uk. If you enjoyed this, do please leave us with a wonderful rating on Google. We'd really appreciate that. So nothing more for me to say now other than see you again soon.